Hold on a second, Chair.
Oh,
We're streaming now.
okay, thank you. Welcome to this evening's meeting, everyone. Good to see so many of you. We've got, on the face of it, a fairly short agenda in terms of number of items, but some of them are quite weighty tombs. But if I can kick off with apologies, have we got any apologies?
We've not received any apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Stuart, at this stage, I think you wanted to just mention a housekeeping point.
Just to advise the committee that BDO will be watching it live. EY may have watched it live, but are now joining us. And the leader and portfolio holder are also watching it as well, but obviously not in the Zoom meeting for ease. Okay,
thank you for that. Okay, item 2, the minutes of the last meeting. The only comments I would make is that a couple of the action points will be picked up at our next meeting in December. But that apart, can we just go page by page? Anything on page 1 for anyone? Yes, I've got a comment, Councillor Butler.
Yeah, Chair, on the apologies, I've got a note in my diary that I sent apologies on the 17th of August, but it hasn't been picked up, or somebody can get me email, but I thought I'd make a point.
Thanks. I'm sure we can correct that, Maisie, if I can leave that one with you. Thank you for that. Anything on page 2, anyone? No, page 3. On page 4. And perhaps if I could ask my deputy to second them.
I don't mind, Ian, but I wasn't at the meeting, so I don't know whether I'm officially
I do apologise, there's an oversight. Someone who was at the meeting, will they mind seconding?
I'll do that, Chair. Les Marriott.
Thank you, Les, for that. Thank you. Right, okay, moving down the agenda then. Item 3, deputations and public addresses. I'm not being made aware of any. Item 4, declarations of interest. Anyone got any declarations? No, don't see any. And item 5, matters of urgency. I've not been made aware of any. So that takes us into item 6, the draft statement of accounts, which I think Stuart will start to present that, but Stuart has also got with him Jean. Forgive me, Jean, I've lost your surname for a second.
Jean Stevenson, Chair.
Jean Stevenson, I do apologise, Jean. And Jean is very much in the engine room and is able to help us tonight in terms of responding to questions where she can. The reason I say where she can, there's obviously a huge amount of detail in these accounts. So there may be issues that Jean would, or Stuart for that matter, would want to take away, and we'll get written responses back to all members. Stuart, can you kick us off on this one?
So to save us time, I'm just going to introduce Jean. Jean's joined us from NCC. So NCC are now hosting our services ex-LGSS in respect of close down and year end. Jean is part of a team that is supporting NCC, NBC and the fire service, and working quite closely with EY already, which is proving useful. She will run through a bit of an introduction, but it is just a case of reminding everybody these are the draft accounts for 2019-20. We're still running through the cycle for 2018-19 as well. Pass over to Jean. She'll do an introduction and then we can take any questions if they arise.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stuart. These draft accounts for 1920, as we've just explained, have been prepared with the prior year comparators based on the draft accounts for 18-19, which are still subject to audit. And some changes are anticipated as a result of the audit. So that will necessitate an update to this draft before the 1920 audit formally commences. However, the accounts as presented now to you fully reflect the transactions recorded in the financial books of the borough for the 1920 year, and as such, can be formally released to allow the period of public inspection to commence. Local authority accounts are by their nature very complex, and that's a fact that's been recognised in the recently published Redmond review into the quality of local authority financial reporting and the external audit process. The Chief Finance Officer's report later on the agenda for this meeting will expand on the findings of the review. The narrative reports placed at the front of the statement of accounts and provides the key information for those that wish to understand how the council tax and housing rents have been spent in the year. The statements that follow are primarily designed to meet accounting standards and to provide information which in some respects is comparable to private sector companies. They're prepared in accordance with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance's Code of Practice for Local Authority Accounting, and that is based on international financial reporting standards. The technical accounts are based, the actual core statements are based on the movement in the net worth of the borough as shown on the balance sheet, the net assets on the balance sheet. That's page 24 of the accounts, but will be a different page of the agenda. That shows the net assets of the council increased by just under 29 million during the year to 460 million. However, the usable reserves of the council reduced by just over 8 million in that period, primarily as a result of investment in the borough's assets. Most of the increase in net worth comes from an increase in the value of the council's property assets, which is not a cash back movement and is allocated into unusable reserves. More detailed information on the usable reserves of the borough is provided at a number of places within the accounts, including in detail at notes 2 and 3 at the beginning of the detailed disclosure notes. The comprehensive income and expenditure statement explains in more detail how the increase in net worth is attributed across the different borough's departments and to a number of technical headings. This actually shows a deficit on services on an accounting basis of approximately 15 million, with 29 million pounds worth of property valuation increases and an actuarial gain on pension assets and liabilities. The movement in reserves then explains how the 15 million deficit is allocated to usable and unusable reserves, resulting in no change to the main general fund and housing revenue account balances, which remain respectively at 4 and 5 million pounds. The cash flow statement then explains how the net cost of services figure moves from the 15 million pound deficit to the increase in cash balances. The final statement included in the core statements is the newer expenditure and funding analysis. Importantly, this starts from the net movement in earmarked and general reserves held for the general fund and the HRA purposes and maps through to the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. This confirms there was a net usage of earmarked reserves across the general fund and the HRA of 1.7 million. The disclosure notes, as required by the Code of Practice, provide a wide range of information for the readers of the accounts. Notes 4 to 6 provide detailed information about the physical assets held by the borough. These used to be referred to as fixed assets, but terminology now means we refer to property, plant and equipment, heritage assets and investment properties. Note 7 provides information about the financial instruments and is supplemented by information provided in Note 29. Financial instruments refers to any financial contract, but in the main is about the borough's borrowing and investments, with details of debtors and creditors as well. And there is more detailed information in other notes about debtors and creditors. And then there's a range of other notes that cover a whole variety of things, including officer remuneration, members' allowances, grants received, and disclosures about the pension scheme. We then have 3 sets of specialist statements. You wouldn't find them in all accounts, but we do find them in the borough's accounts. We have the housing revenue account figures, which are included within the core statements as well, but they are presented separately to give that clarity that the rents paid by the council tenants are separate from the council tax expenditure and income. The collection fund is separate to the general fund and includes all the money collected by the borough in its role as a billing authority on behalf of the county council, the fire authority and the police and crime commissioner. The core statements only reflect the borough's share of the funds. And then we have the final set of statements, the group accounts, which incorporates the figures for Northamptonshire Partnership homes with the borough's accounts to provide a full picture of the economic activity of the borough. And councils are only required to compile group accounts when they have a material interest in a subsidiary or associated company. To wrap up, the accounts are approximately 140 pages long, and there's been a number of people involved in compiling them. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who has been involved over the last few weeks in pulling these accounts together. It's been a real team effort.
Okay, thank you, Jean, for that. And can I just echo your last comment, really? If you could pass thanks on behalf of the Audit Committee back to all those staff involved. I know it's a mammoth task there, so I do appreciate your efforts there. The bad news is there's a bit more to go as well on these things, but it's good that you've got them to this particular point. So the next one from me is really any questions on this? Yes, Councillor Golby, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jean, for that. Obviously, recognise the huge amount of work gone into putting these forward as draft accounts, as has been made quite clear. What is the sort of expectation around having these accounts signed off and gone through auditors, etc., before? Given that we've only got 5 odd months left of all of the councils in Northamptonshire, but I just wondered, perhaps Stuart could just explain what the expectation is around how and where the process sits in terms of getting all these old accounts signed off.
Chair, if you're happy. It depends on how our audit that's due to recommence goes with EY for the 18-19. If that passes through successfully and they're able to sign off in a reasonable time, then they'll be able to immediately start this set of audit and accounts. And when they're in a position to sign those off, then we will. If that took longer than the existence of NBC, then they would be signed off in the new authority, as would any other sets of accounts that were still residual. But the governance and all the teams will be migrating across, so the knowledge will be there.
Okay. Thanks, Stuart. Just to be optimistic, Steve, do you want to make any additional comment to that from your perspective? I know, again, you'll have your own constraints there, but
yeah, no, I think Stuart summed up really well. Clearly, we are recommencing 1890 audit from next week. We've been working with Jean and colleagues on the NCC side, and have engaged with them to look at the information that's back on the portal, which we know is moved on significantly in the interim. We've got a team booked in to do the 18-19 audit and then move straight on to 19-20. And actually, we're probably going to commence some aspects of the 19-20 audit earlier, like in VFM, for example, because the year's already gone, so you can do that, and it's not quite as information intensive in the context of sample testing, etc., etc. So our preliminary aim is to get the 18-19 audits signed off as soon as we possibly can. Ideally, I'd like to do so before Christmas, but that given what we found on the NCC audit, will be a bit of a challenge. The ultimate aim, though, is to make sure that 1819 and 1920 is signed off by the end of March, before the cessation of the two authorities. I've got a couple of things to say in respect of that and some of the key issues that were already arising out, which I'm happy to pick up later on. But that's the idea of the process, and I think ourselves and Stuart and Jean and her team are all aligned on what the ask is.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. Councillor Golby, are you happy with the response? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any further questions from anyone?
Councillor Stone is indicating.
Sorry.
Could we know whether we're going to be having the same internal and external auditors going forward? Because that obviously would make the transition a lot simpler if we were, because they would be carrying that kind of experience and knowledge with them.
If I can answer that, Chair. So my understanding is that from an external audit perspective, the PSAA, who hold the contract for the audit, no, they don't hold the contract for the audit. That both councils have to determine whether or not they wish to opt into the PSAA contract, because it doesn't automatically novate as independent bodies. Both councils need to make a decision that if that is what they wish to do. At that point, the PSAA, if you don't do that, you've got to run your own process. If you do that, the PSAA will provide an appointed auditor and consult with the authority in respect of that. So yes, it is an option, but there's a couple of hoops to go through first. And the first one of those is that both of the new bodies need to make a decision as to which they wish to opt into the PSAA contract first.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I find it a bit concerning that all of that is still to be decided, actually. But anyway, I wanted to ask a couple of minor questions on what's been presented to us. And one is about what's happening with 106 monies and how we're monitoring and guarding that, really, I suppose, for Northampton against the projects they've been allocated against. And I'm a bit surprised to see how low the income from 106 is, given that we are building and regenerating and doing all kinds of things. I'm really surprised about that. So I'd like to understand that. And I'd also like to understand why the allowance for the mayor went up by 12,000 last year.
Yeah, can I just come in here, Stuart, just before you do come in, just to not lose sight of the prior question in terms of continuity of auditors. Are you aware of any discussions that are taking place on that to see that there's a possibility of a smooth transition on that aspect of the change?
Obviously, it's a question for the new authorities. The new 151s are now formally appointed. They're currently working with their new management boards. There are a number of finance work streams that are running for future Northants. Governance, year-end, close down, handovers are all part of those processes, Chair. In terms of when you can decide, until there's a legal body, it's difficult to make contractual commitments and decisions. So the collective CFOs of Northamptonshire have been discussing, expressing a view, and it's up to the two 151s then to take forward, particularly around external auditors. In terms of internal auditors, there is a work stream around internal audit risk that the two councils are going to take forward. For us, at the moment, BDO's contract ends on the 31st of March. And it's up to the new authority as to how it commissions internal audit practice going forward.
Okay, Thank you for that, Stuart. Sorry, I didn't want to stop you answering Councillor Stone's earlier question.
Can I just park my other questions, because I think this is really, really important, and thank you for taking that up again in terms of the auditors. I do, right, so one of the questions I sent to you, Stuart, was about governance and the constitution and policies. In my view, is that the amount of work that's been done at NBC on all those things, coming out, rightly so, coming out of a really bad situation, has meant, in my view, that we have got some really strong, robust, quite progressive policies. I sense, because of the work I do with the Shadow Authority, that there is a resistance to taking forward things coming out of Northampton. Now, I would be alarmed, to say the least, if our policies, our constitution, our governance practices were sidelined in the new authority. So what I'd be looking for is an assurance that coming out of Northampton at the member level and the officer level is the promotion and support for all those things in the new authority. Now, I'm not saying they can't be improved, but I think they are a great deal better than anything I've seen in any of the other authorities. So I would be really concerned if all those things were not promoted and supported.
So from an officer perspective, we do promote everything we can. We're as active in the various work streams as we can be. Obviously, it's up to the new authority itself and the shadow, I'm going to call it shadow cabinet. It's called a shadow executive at the moment, to take forward some of these things. I'm not aware of any specific resistance to Northampton per se. You know, everybody's got different ways to do things, and obviously with the unitary going forward, it's going to have a much bigger agenda than we do as a borough. So some bits may appear different going forward. We have many county and borough councillors, yourself, Councillor Golby, and others. So I don't think we as officers perceive a definitive block for us. Some of the work streams are not progressing as fast as perhaps we would like in some cases, but COVID has impacted on some of that. But we are as active as we can be in promoting what we believe is good governance.
Thank you, Stuart, for that. Councillor Stone, are we okay now to pick up your other points? I'm going back to Stuart again, I think.
I'll do the mayor one if I may, because that's an easier one. The mayor allowance is something that is up to the mayor whether they wish to draw it or not. So it's not so much an increase as on 1 year there was a temporary reduction in mayor allowance because they chose to use the funds in a different way rather than draw it personally. So it looks like an increase, but it isn't. In terms of Section 106, our Director of Planning is very protective of Section 106, even internally from our perspective, and the agreements are very tightly written. They can only be used for what they were intended to and within the parameters of where. So we've often had discussions about it. In some cases, that's a frustration because even we would like to use it slightly wider and we can't. So I have no qualms that the Director of Planning will continue to protect 106 and make sure it's used properly in the right place for the right things. And nobody can actually change that.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. I've got 3 or 4, if I may, Stuart. First one is on page 17. There is a table of non-financial performance indicators, and it was really a question of sort of governance arrangements around them. We've got quite a few that are we label as outside the agreed tolerances and are shown as red. I just wondered, Stuart, if you could explain to me what the process within the council is for monitoring those particular issues. I can't hear you.
Sorry, as per the report, the performance information gets reported quarterly to Cabinet, and that gives all councillors an opportunity to challenge question. The deputy leader actually leads on performance indicators, and he's quite robust at checking on the officers. And would also point out that red outside tolerance actually sometimes includes some positives as well. They've just gone slightly wide. It doesn't always mean it's bad. But certainly from the perspective of this set, these would have been reviewed in the outturn report that went to Cabinet shortly after 1920 finished. So the actual review would have been conducted then.
Okay, thank you for that. So I was more concerned with the fact that we'd got a process for doing that type of thing. If I can move on to page 37, the core financial statements. This is probably one for Jean, either now or you may need to look into this and come back to us, Jean. But I noticed in terms of income levels, fees and charges between 1819 and 1920 have reduced quite considerably, 92 down to 74 million. And similarly, government grants and contributions have also fallen, not quite to the same extent. But I just wondered if you could give us an explanation of that either now or in due course.
Yeah, that is something we'll have to get back on. I'm not close enough to the detail to be able to give you a sensible answer at this point.
Okay, that's understandable given the detail. If I can then move us on to page 61, which is one of the notes to the core financial statements, and it's around investments. And again, looking at the movement between years, we've got a significant increase in money market funds, going from 12 to 32 million at the point of year end, whereas short-term investments are falling or have fallen quite considerably over that same period. Again, is there a straightforward explanation, or is that something you'll need to look at a bit more deeply?
I suspect Stuart can give some more detail on this, but it looks, without knowing the full details, which we'd have to, well, Stuart should be able to answer, but it's a slight change in Treasury management policy between where money is held. The short-term investment certificates of deposit would be fixed term, and a move to money market funds. But I believe there were other issues as well. So let's see if Stuart's got some further information.
Stuart?
So, Chair, we basically increased our borrowing for HRA as Public Works Loan Board offered us an incredibly good rate, and that was for some schemes that were already approved and underway. But as a result of that, we couldn't lodge the money in a fixed term because it was actually going to be drawn down within a period of time. They're probably not in these accounts, but there will be some quite unusual movements, I imagine, in 2021 due to the scale of COVID funding that's passing through our hands on a very short-term basis. So sadly, we can't take any opportunity to make any interest on it because it just comes in, it's a large sum of money and goes out just as rapidly. Okay.
Yeah, if I can move on, thank you for that. On page 98, I'm on the HRA, and I noticed that in terms of the bottom line, the HRA moved in 1819 from a surplus of 10 or 11 million to a deficit of about 9 million in 1920. It appears to be, from the information that I've been able to look at, as though it's linked to levels of depreciation that's been provided. Could you say any more on that at this stage, Jean, or does that need further digging?
I would need to check with my fixed assets specialist and come back to you with the details on that.
Okay, thank you. And I think, yeah, this is the final one from me. The collection fund. And again, a bit of detail there. If we look at the total expenditure on the collection fund in 1819, it's about 215 million, and it's moved through the year up to 234 million. That change, a lot of it seems to be related to an item above, which refers to payments to the county council, hitting 33 million at the end of 1920. Could you just explain that to me?
Again, having not been about during the year and not knowing the details, I wouldn't be able to fully explain. I could hazard a guess, but I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as such.
Okay.
To get you a proper answer.
That's understandable. Could you, Jean, one final thing? That was my final question. Obviously, the nature of the beast, some of these things do take a bit of time to get underneath. But obviously, they're important sort of governance questions, really. Could you just give some indication as to when you would be able to issue something that we could all see as members, and come back if there's anything we need further clarification on?
I think it would probably be the middle to the end of next week. I'm just aware that a few key staff, with it being school half term this week, are unavailable. Okay,
that's fine. Well, obviously, I look forward to seeing those. But thank you for your contribution this evening. Just before I finished, I was just going to ask any more questions. I can see Councillor Stone's got a hand up.
Just a quick one. The borough does a huge amount of work as the collection agent. Do we get paid for it, or do we do that for free? I find that absolutely extraordinary.
I think Stuart's itching to come in on this one. Stuart?
Sorry, Chair, just to give committee assurance, what we're going to do is take the questions away. We'll answer them. We'll email them around, but for transparency, we'll include that as an annex to my update in December, so that they're lodged on record proper. In terms of the collection fund, once upon a time, collection fund meant you had a good balance in a bank account whilst you were collecting and then paying out to the various preceptors, and you used to earn interest on it. Now interest rates are so low, there's a danger that we actually pay soon to have money kept in the bank. But it has always been a moot point with the collecting authorities, that we do all the hard work, do the billing, take the challenges of asking people to pay the bills in our name, and then don't necessarily get an administration reward for it.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart, for that. Sorry, Jean, do you want to come in on that?
Can I just say that there is a statutorily set amount that the borough will be allowed to, that the borough is allowed to retain for the business rates collection, which is the cost collection that is shown as a charge expenditure line on the collection fund. That would be credited to the borough.
Thank you.
Which is 284,000 on this set of accounts.
Great stuff. Thank you. Any other comments before I close this item down? No? Okay. Thank you for that. I don't know. I assume we're being asked just to note the position on that. So let's move on to item 7, which is the draft annual governance statement, which I think is Joe's cup of tea. So if Joe, you could, that's perhaps not the right way of describing it, but you know what I mean. If you wouldn't mind presenting this one, Joe, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just to, as Chair said, this is the draft AGS for 1920, and this will accompany the statement of accounts once they've been finalised. The Leader of the Council and Section 151 will sign the AGS for approval. As you can see when you go through the report, it details the governance structure within Northampton Borough Council, so what committees are done by the councillors and the officers, and it goes through to the risk management framework that we have and the governance framework, It has extracts in there from the internal audit opinion, so both for the MBC and MPH. So that information is in there as well. It details the governance improvements that have been made throughout 1920, and also gives a summary of the audits that have been carried out, again, in MBC and MPH. It is a positive statement for 1920. I think it's we've made great progress during 1920 and 2021. Hopefully, you know, we've improved on that as well. So this is for, as I say, it's a draft. I'm not expecting there to be any major changes to what's already included in the draft. But really it's for the Audit Committee to review and note, and I would appreciate any comments.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. If I can just perhaps start first this time. Obviously, it's a backward look, and it documents well what we've been doing in the council as part of that particular financial year. The observation I would make, rather than a question, is I think it links quite nicely to what Councillor Stone was saying earlier about the information in Northampton that would be valuable to the new organisation going forward. It gives quite a nice story of where we're at. It doesn't pretend that we're perfect, but you know that it does reflect the fact that improvements have been made. So I think it's very, very helpful from that perspective. Anyway, enough from me. Any questions from members? Councillor Stone.
Yeah, lovely. I wanted to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that's gone into this and the very definite improvements that have been made. So thank you very much for that. And I wanted to ask if there was a way, or if indeed we do, benchmark that work against best practice in other local authorities. So the question would be, you know, we know where we started on this journey, and it was a pretty picture, and we've seen huge improvements, but how does that get measured, if you see what I mean?
I think probably against other local authorities in the county, it will, a lot of it goes against, well, the Constitution is what's in there. It depends what the processes and procedures they've got. Internal audit obviously play a large part in the authorities to make sure that everybody's on track. From a benchmarking point of view, I'm not really sure that has been done in the past. Obviously, going into the West Northants, then that will be brought together in the work streams that will go forward.
Yeah, if I could maybe just add to that, my experience of these things is it's actually quite difficult to get a very precise sort of benchmarking type exercise on these things. I think, though, that doesn't sort of fly in the face of the next thing I was going to say, which was you can, though, pick up best practice. And that, I think, to be fair to give credit to Jo and her colleagues, that's what she's been trying to do. And the other observation I would make is one of the things that I wanted to pick up towards the end of this session is we are to try and do a training session with BDO. And one of the things that I'm keen for BDO to do is to bring their thoughts on best practice from other organisations. So in that way, we sort of have a bit of a benchmark to measure ourselves up with, but it's not a benchmark in the sense of a sort of performance indicator or anything. But I think having that sort of culture of trying to improve and checking out how other people are doing and whether someone's got a trick that we haven't got, I think is always useful to have.
Could I ask then, Chair, something that's really bothers me, and I'm not even sure I know how to frame the question, but given the reason why we are where we are, things went badly wrong at the county and things in the past have gone badly wrong at the borough. What is the role of the internal audit in picking those things up before it reaches a crisis? I mean, is there a role, I suppose, is the question.
Stuart's got his hand up. Stuart, you can bat first, then I'll come in on this one.
So I think if we're going to stay on the positive thing, it's a good report, and it shows progress for all the reasons Councillor Stone highlights. And you know, I have no qualms. I put a lot of that down to Jo herself, and the work she does, and her robust approach to all of us, including myself. The fact that she has an unfettered route to the chief exec, the leader, and the chair of audit. So I can't suppress anything either. I do think internal audit have a key role, and I would suggest that we have seen a material difference between the previous internal audit company and the current one. I think from what I've read and what I see, we do a lot more. I think also, you know, we've changed chair of the audit committee to bring a bit more challenge to the process, and I think the new chief exec, when we actually first looked at the audit program that we wished to do with BDO, the reason it was so harsh in the first year was we did do it the correct way, as advised by BDO, Jo, and the chair, which is look at the highest risk, look at all the areas you might be tempted to not want an auditor to go to look at, and ask your new internal auditors to look at them. So the first year was the most painful for us, but that's something that we chose to do, and I think, you know, that demonstrates an enthusiasm for governance. And so, but I do believe internal audit have a role, but Jo is our client manager, and in addition to internal audit, runs an internal controls group, which does a lot more field work, but also does some of the smaller auditing for us as well. And I think that works well. But I do personally put a lot of credit to Jo and her robust approach to us.
Could I ask, Chair, is Jo's role usual practice? Because we didn't have a Jo before, did we? And, you know, though that I'm really pleased, you know, the internal controls team, I can see they've been really impactful. But is this a normal role?
I can only give you a personal view from the places I've worked in, and I think the straight answer is I don't think it is generally a normal role. But if I can just maybe say something else that helps contextualize that, is Stuart was saying before that BDO have made a good impact, and I think that I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And your question initially was about, you know, what are internal audit doing to help us, you know, keep out the hot water, or whatever way you want to describe it. And I don't think an internal audit function can do that by themselves. I think if you've got an appropriate infrastructure around them that points them into a right direction, gives them an opportunity to report in a robust way with the right culture, you know, one that's listening and not trying to suppress stuff, then I think that's where you get the benefit of them coming from. And what we've heard from what Stuart's just said about Jo and the stuff around this internal control team, they've obviously been key to that. So I think you can do it either the way we've done it with, if you like, Jo being in the middle and doing that, but other people have done it will do it in slightly different ways. But the test is whether, you know, that infrastructure is there and is robust, rather than the particular method you use, I think.
But so lessons for the new authority, I feel.
Yeah, well, exactly. Because they may, I can't speak about the other authorities, Councillor Stone, but, you know, they may be as effective without a sort of Jo type role, if you know what I mean. But it could be that they aren't as effective and could do with a Jo type role. It's difficult to say this from this position. But anyway. Councillor Golby, you had your hand up patiently before. Have you still got a question there?
Yeah, well, it was just a comment, really, just to welcome the report and the general positive narrative throughout it, and how it's captured in the conclusion. And I think it is important that conversation and the points that have been made. It's, you know, and Stuart mentioned the likes of myself. I'm on the shadow executive, that we keep that rigor around audit as much as we can, and the general improvements and the lessons learned that we've taken from MBC, and of course other experiences in other places as well. But we've got to, you know, there's been a lot of effort being put in here over the last 2 or 3 years going back, and we've got to try and keep that trajectory and transfer some of that as we move forward. So just to agree with broadly the points that have been made, but it's a good positive report as well.
Good to hear that. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, further to some of the comments that have been made, I mean, there's been huge changes within the way that the borough were doing things. Full credit to Jo and her team for producing such an excellent report. I mean, a couple of points I want to pick up on is the fact that Northampton Partnership Homes went outside the borough. There's complications with that. That's all been dealt with. If we look at the assignment assurance levels, 12 items were looked at, and 11 of them were reasonable or substantial assurance. Now, to me, that speaks for itself. That, you know, only 1 out of 12 was a partial assurance. Now, everybody would like to say, including me, well, they should all be substantial. It's not going to happen in real life, I'm afraid, particularly with an area such as this, because it's moving all the time. And I'd just like to say well done to everybody involved. I think there's been a hell of a lot of work done, certainly since I came on the council, and it's only due to the people that are there that we are where we are.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Councillor Butler. Brian, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo the comments that's been made, and I'd like to give the compliments to Jo and the team. And I'd just like to say, Chair, I'd like to say I propose that we accept the officer's recommendations at the committee review and note the content of the draft annual governance statement. I'd just like to propose that we'd accept that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. If we've not got any other questions, I think that's quite a good point to finish that item off, and I'd also add my congratulations to Jo on that.
Thank you for all your comments.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Jo. Right, I think we're over to Stuart now for item 8. It's fairly short, Chief Finance Officer report.
Sorry, Chair, I just want to check with Democratic Services. So you had to propose, I just want to make sure, as we're doing governance, that everybody was in agreement and Democratic Services was happy with that. Sorry.
All okay? Yeah. Good, thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I actually dive into this, as we do have our external auditor on the line, I wonder whether it might be interesting for Steve Clark to say his piece first, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So in terms of where we are, we have had a pause over the summer into early autumn whilst both the council was reassessing what it needed to do with the very extensive list of information requirements that we'd sent through. We know that Jean and team have been working on that, and there's a lot more information on the portal for us to look at. We have a team coming in next week, and then we'll be in situ to then crack through that work and move through the audit as swiftly as we possibly can. We appreciate and understand that Jean and team are also have other demands and commitments.
I'm not sure if somebody's got some children in the background who are enjoying themselves far more than we are, but it's whoever it is, would they mind just ask me if they just tone down a little bit, because I'm really struggling to hear.
Is that okay now? Is it any better?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, sorry to spoil the fun. But...
No, not a problem. We've been working with Jean and her team on the county, so we've got a good collective understanding of what we need and what Jean and her team produce, and we will roll through the audit as quickly and as expediently as we possibly can. We're also going to pick up the 19, 99, 20 BFM work at the same time, with a view to just getting through this as quickly as possible. I think it's fair to say, and happy to take any comments from Jean, that she and her team have got demands on their time as well, and with other commitments. So it's a case of managing those collective commitments to work through the process. The aim is to make sure, the ultimate backstop aim is to make sure that by the end of March we have 18, 19 and 19, 20 signed off, clearly 18, 19 coming much sooner in the process. There was one particular challenge which I will alert members to, and Stuart is well aware of, which is a point for debate at the moment, and that's in respect of the disclosures required from a going concern perspective, and the impact on our opinion as a result of the borough and all of the borough's demising. And that is because we can get a very good line of sight as to what the position is up to the 31st of March. But in the context of our audit opinion, we are required to give an opinion. The authorities preparing the accounts on a going concern basis, quite rightly so. But clearly there are material decisions to be made in respect of the new authorities, which will happen over a period of time between now and the end of March. And those decisions formally haven't been taken by the new authorities. So my expectation is that from a going concern perspective, whilst I have no doubt that we will be able to sign off on a going concern basis, we will need something, there will need to be adequate disclosure within the borough's accounts for 18, 19 and 19, 20, and a reference in our opinion, which is referred to in emphasis and matter, that there are those material decisions to be taken which cannot be taken until a period from after the point of signing the accounts. I think I've raised this with the council, we've raised it with all the other boroughs as well, and with the new interim and permanent Section 151 officers and the new authorities. So that's just something to throw in. I don't think it makes a huge big amount of difference in terms of the core audit work we're doing. It will just require a bit of thinking through in terms of those disclosures regarding going concern, which to be fair, I would have expected in any position that the authority would be in at this point in time, given the nature of the timeline of local government organisation.
Can I just come back on that so that I can get a bit of clarity myself on this? In terms of the assessment of the going concern, what I'm struggling to understand is why that is any different, because we've got a change to the makeup of the organisations from 1st of April onwards. Because presumably that going concern issue, if Northampton would have been continuing, that wouldn't have been an issue. And similarly, I would guess with the county council and
okay. So there's two slightly different aspects. That's a very good question. So one is that if say everything was still in situ, this is a situation we're facing with every other council. Yeah. So they only have guaranteed funding up to the end of March. They've still got uncertainties around COVID, but but depending on their level of reserves, and depending, there are two key things. One is the level of reserves, so the headroom in the reserves, usable reserves, and secondly, it's their liquidity position, i.e. their access to cash, which is clearly a key concern in respect to going concern. So where we are with some authorities is that where they have a poorer level of reserves, is where their liquidity position is not as certain, we will end up with some form of emphasis of matter, as I've described in respect to the councils, although it's slightly different. In some authorities, because they may have significant reserves and their access to liquidity is really, really strong and very clear, and you can map that through from a 12 months from signing the accounts position, there will be no emphasis of matter. In the case of the borough and all the other boroughs and all the counties, so this is a position that you're all in the same position, it's the same assessment anyway. It will depend on the size of the financial gap, as in there will be decisions which need to be taken. So say we try and sign these accounts off in late December, early January, just say, there will still be material decisions to be made around, for example, council tax levels, around a number of other things, which one won't be made, and secondly, even if some of those assumptions are made, they can't be put in the public domain because they're some working assumptions from an executive as opposed to formally ratified decisions from the council members. Now, depending on the makeup of the councils between North and West, they are now, and we've already been pulling together what those gaps may look like and where that funding and financing arrangement may come from. We are, and that's probably the key difference in the decisions. Normally, you get 12 months line of sight. Whereas in this position, you won't have 12 months line of sight because things will have to happen, which we know will happen, but they won't have happened formally by the time I sign the accounts up. And that's the difference. So an emphasis of matter is not a modification to the going concern basis. We're not disputing it. It's all in statute. It's a going concern. It's been set up explicit for that purpose. What we would draw the attention to the reader of is that there still remains. What I expect is that there will be, in the basis of preparation note in the accounts, there will be a standard pretty much across all of the boroughs, which says this is the base of the 31st of March. Beyond the 31st of March, this is the position. These are the key decisions to be made. They will be made, but at the point of signing the accounts, they haven't yet been made. And that's all it does. So basically, it's drawing to the attention of the reader to the attention of what the actual factual position is. That's all it's doing. I appreciate that it's quite a nuanced view, and it's quite
as long
unusual.
as we don't get a 114 on the 1st of April. Okay.
If you get a 114 on the 1st of April, hopefully I'll have had a line of sight well before that. We won't be talking about an emphasis of matter. We'll be talking about a material uncertainty issue. So that's the other piece, is that if depending on where it is, if we came to a view that it was so uncertain, I may take a different view. But at the moment, that's not my position.
Chair, it's probably worth me offering the balanced view to that one, because there's a lot of nuance in there. So I've obviously had a discussion with the external auditor. I'm aware of discussions with other 151s. I'm aware of the two respective 151s of the new authorities seeking to build their budgets at the moment. And obviously the timeline has allowed them to understand what the challenge is, but they are not yet going through the full process of setting the budgets. Councillor Golby has mentioned he's on the shadow executives and implementation execs, so he'll be aware of the timeline to give people assurance. My conversation with Ernst & Young has highlighted that in reality, no council in several hundred years has actually ever failed properly. we morph, we change shape, we cannot avoid debts, and we have assets. There are reserves. There could be difficult decisions that need to go forward, but I would see no reason why anybody would think there was not a going concern. I'm aware of some of the numbers that are bandied around, but they've been headline numbers within the sort of finance departments to just help us focus, for want of a better phrase. I also believe that by the time we get round to signing our accounts, the shadow authorities will have had a chance to at least think about their draft budgets and provide peace of mind to the external auditor, in which case this might not be an issue for us at all. Okay,
thank you for that comment, Stuart, and your earlier comments, Steve. That was helpful. I think we can probably move on now to Stuart's report. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'll just... So just unmuting properly this time. To help the committee, particularly where we're not necessarily covering a full agenda, it's become sort of practice for me to do a bit of a summary report to give some assurance. The first thing I'd like to point out is the eagle-eyed Deputy Chair spotted a typo for me. For the record for Maisie, on page 173 of the pack, 4.5.1, it should read internal auditors, BDO, not external auditors. Just so that you're all aware that eagle eyes are watching what I write. So going through the report itself, basically there have been no accounting policy changes. There's a Treasury Management mid-year report will actually come in December. The Treasury Department's actually quite busy at the moment in terms of statement of accounts entries, but also keeping tabs on all the cash that's flowing through from various government grants. So just as a sort of an update, obviously the BASE grants came through, and they about 36 million rested with us for about 16 weeks. So there's no money to be made in investing it. We have to hold it in as short account as we can. 3.4 then talks about the statement of accounts for 2019-20, which has obviously been an agenda item today, along with EY have actually joined us, so that explains the timing of audit. And EY and I have differences of opinion over the actual audit fee, and we've agreed that we'll take that to a third party, an independent party. In terms of the 18-19, EY has again today confirmed that they will be restarting the audit again in November. 3.6 touches on the internal audit programme. Again, because we're not bringing BDO here tonight, the chair asked if we could do a quick summary update. So in the appendix, there's a couple of tables there. In respect of 18-19, there's only 3 outstanding ones, and we will actually remove those because in agreement with BDO, they will actually go forward to the new authority, and that's particularly around some of the training recommendations. So it's almost too late now for us to conduct useful training in some areas. 19-20, we're making progress to close that down, and then on the second page it gives you a brief update of where we are in this year's audit programme. It was a little slow starting because COVID caught us, and actually we were using a lot of BDO resource to support us through the BASE grant process. So they were actually reviewing every single claim for us as well as part of the thing. So that's covered there. In terms of budget update for this year, what's in the report there is that we had a reduced overspend from 1.4 million to just below 1 million reporting to Cabinet, and we're in the process of writing the next Cabinet report, and we anticipate that improving again, courtesy of some government grant coming through, and that will be going to Cabinet on the 11th of November. So if there's any questions on the budget 2020 or 2021, then we'll take those questions at that Cabinet meeting. 3.8 is a very short introduction to Redmond review, which the chair also asked for. We've provided hot links to the actual studies, and the key outcome of that is that local government accounts are not particularly readable to professionals or taxpayers or any other interested party. And the core recommendation from the Redmond review is that we produce something that's more akin to an annual report, which takes the start budget, reflects what got used during the year and how, which will be much more informative for councillors and residents. We will still have to produce some technical accounts, but they will be very much, that's the technical side of things. So I think that's quite a good recommendation. They've also been working with the external auditors companies to consider whether the audit fees are appropriate for the level of audit requested. They've also looked at the nature of some of the items in the accounts, the timing. So traditionally in the past, audit companies were able to phase a lot of their public sector work through the year or spread it out a bit more. And then somebody had an initiative where we would all condense it to the same few months, which really compacted all the resource requirements. So the link is there. If you're minded to, please do follow it and have a read. There are some quite interesting recommendations. Those recommendations will be taken forward by the new unitary because it relates to those periods. I'd be more than happy to take questions if you go off and read it, and we may actually include part of that as the BDO update and the training, just as a light touch if there's questions. Other than that, it is a report for you to note, and whether there's any specific questions you wish to ask.
Thanks, Stuart. I can see Councillor Stone's hand up there.
Yeah, thank you for that. This coming budget is a worry, isn't it, because of COVID? And then going forward beyond that to the unification of all the budgets is a worry. And one of the things that's really worrying me is one of the exercises the county did a couple of years ago was zero-based budgeting. And for me, that was quite interesting because it showed the gap between what was in the budget, what was needed to be in the budget, and what the gaps were. And we'd got so used to, you know, cost-cutting exercises. It was a really interesting exercise. So, you know, when we're looking at quality services and all of that, how do we know what the actual cost is? How do we know? If we don't do that kind of exercise, how do we know? We get used to muddling through and doing the best we can. Well, you know, that's not really good enough, is it? And if we don't know what the budget gap is compared to, you know, if we don't know the difference between what we've got and what we really would need, how can we do the work to fill that gap? So the question is, why aren't we doing zero-based budgeting?
From my perspective, it's because we only have 6 months left. So I have no budget to do. When we set the budget for this year, at the time, we'd anticipated moving into unitary that year. So again, you know, we were a bit back-footed in continuing relatively normal practice. Zero-based budgeting is an interesting exercise. Ian's grimacing a little bit there. It's a good cyclical exercise. It's not healthy to do it every year because otherwise it costs too much and just creates an overhead. Good for accountants, but not good for the taxpayer. I suspect that the unitary, because of the timing, will need to move across in transition, and that actually something like zero-based budgeting may be something that it would look to do during its first year when it actually understands what resources it's got, what challenges, and so on, and it's building its teams. In terms of benchmarking, there's various benchmark approaches. So SIPFA has tried to assist with benchmarking. The difficulty is that a lot of local authorities code everything differently. So, you know, if we take Jo, is she internal audit or is she a governance resource or everything else? So you end up getting more of an industry of explaining variances than some of the improvements you get. But I'm pretty sure the new authority will need to adopt something like zero-based budgeting going forward once it's got past vesting date. Chair may actually wish to give his own professional view on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Stuart's just said, really. The zero-based budgeting, I know Stuart said I was grimacing, it wasn't about zero-based budgeting. I think it's can be really powerful, but it tends to be resource intensive. And you have to sort of, weigh that up against the easier way of sort of just incrementally changing budgets. But periodically, I think it's good to break that cycle of just an incremental change. And I think Stuart's right that the new authority, given that it's got information and different services coming from different directions, I think it's fairly inevitable that it will need to do something akin to a zero-based budgeting exercise, but we'll probably call it something slightly different, given that it's it's going to be new into a lot of those services. Yeah, in principle, I've absolutely no problem with what you're saying there, Councillor Stone. Okay, any other questions for Stuart in terms of his paper? No. Thanks for the paper, Stuart. Just a comment from me. Pleased as well that the budget, clearly this is a critical year given the COVID financial pressures. So the fact that we seem to be frequently going back to cabinet, and I guess even more frequently to leading members and so on, is absolutely the way that things should be done. And just to echo a little bit what Stuart said about the Redmond review, it's very, very detailed. I personally found it quite difficult to disagree with most of the criticisms that were mentioned. It will probably be less clear in terms of ways forward between different professional views and so on. But there's certainly quite a few things that if they were tweaked during the time we've been working on things at Northampton, we would have been in a better position. So hopefully there's some optimism for the future in terms of some of those issues. So if we've got no other comments on that, I think we note Stuart's report. And I think that brings us to the end of the formal papers. Just in terms of a couple of issues that have been running, the member training that we touched on earlier, hopefully as many of you as possible can get to take part in that. I think it would be really useful to hear what BDO can do for us on that. And I suppose not just for us as a council, but those of you that will be moving on to the new authority, there will be some useful tips and so on there. And the final thing I would say is the agenda for our December meeting looks as though it's going to be fairly weighty, because as well as the normal accounts type information, we'll have all the internal audit stuff coming back, the risk registers, etc., etc. So it could be a midnight end for that one, just to spark your enthusiasm. But many thanks for your contributions. I think that's the end of this session, which has been a useful one. I hope you'll agree. And hopefully I'll see most of you very shortly with the internal audit training, but if not, we'll be back together in December for our next meeting. But thank you for your contributions, and enjoy the rest of the week.